What happens when one of Britain's most beloved comedic legends clashes with one of America's most outspoken hosts on live television? In just 30 seconds, a simple question turned into the most explosive moment in talk show history. Before we dive into this insane drama, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the backstage fights, and the moments celebrities wish you'd never see. Last night on The View, what started as a conversation about comedy and culture spiraled into an all-out war between Rowan Atkinson and Whoopi Goldberg that nobody saw coming. The British icon, known for keeping his personal opinions close to the chest, finally snapped in a way that left the studio audience in complete shock. The tension started building the moment Atkinson walked onto the set. You could see it in Whoopi's body language, the way she sat back in her chair with her arms already crossed before he even sat down. The usual warm welcome The View gives to guests was noticeably absent. The other hosts smiled politely, but there was an awkwardness in the air that the audience could feel. Whoopi opened with what seemed like a friendly question about his comedy career, asking him about the evolution of humor over the decades. But even in that opening question, there was an edge to her voice that made everyone pay attention. Atkinson, always thoughtful in his responses, began talking about how comedy has changed, how audiences have shifted, and how comedians today face different challenges than when he started out. He was barely 2 minutes into his answer when Whoopi interrupted him mid-sentence. "So, you're saying comedy was better back in your day?" she asked, her tone shifting from curious to confrontational in an instant. The other hosts exchanged worried glances, sensing something was off. This wasn't the playful debate they usually had with guests. This felt personal. Atkinson paused, clearly caught off guard by the sudden edge in her voice. You could see him take a moment to collect his thoughts, his fingers drumming briefly on the armrest of his chair. "That's not what I said at all," he replied, his British politeness still intact, but you could hear the frustration creeping in like water seeping through a crack. "I'm simply saying that the landscape has changed. Comedy always reflects the time we're living in. It's a mirror held up to society, and as society changes, so does the reflection." Whoopi leaned forward in her chair, her eyes narrowing, not letting it go. "But you've been pretty vocal about cancel culture, haven't you? About how comedians can't say anything anymore without people getting offended?" She emphasized the word anything with such sarcasm that it made people in the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. The audience went quiet. You could hear people stop rustling their programs, stop whispering to each other. This wasn't the playful banter anyone expected when they came to see a taping of The View. This felt like watching something break in real time. Atkinson shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening slightly, and you could see his knuckles go white as he gripped the armrest. "I've spoken about the importance of freedom of expression, yes. That's not the same as saying people can't be offended. People have every right to their feelings. They have every right to express disagreement, to protest, to speak out. What concerns me is when that expression turns into destruction, when disagreement becomes a weapon to end careers and silence voices entirely." "But you think they're too sensitive, right?" Whoopi pressed, her voice getting louder with each word. "You think people today just can't take a joke? That we're all just a bunch of snowflakes who need to toughen up?" The way she said snowflakes dripped with contempt. Atkinson's eyes narrowed. You could see his patience starting to wear thin, like a rope fraying under too much weight. His voice remained measured, but there was steel underneath now. "I think there's a difference between being thoughtful about the impact of your words and being paralyzed by fear of saying anything at all. Comedy should make people think, sometimes make them uncomfortable. But it should also bring people together. It should help us see our shared humanity, even when we disagree. The best comedy has always done that. Punched up at power, challenged assumptions, made us question the status quo. One of the other hosts, sensing the temperature rising dangerously, tried to jump in to change the subject. "Maybe we could talk about your upcoming projects," she started, but Whoopi wasn't having it. She waved her hand dismissively, cutting her co-host off mid-sentence without even looking at her. No, I want to hear this. Because it sounds to me like you're one of these people who thinks they should be able to say whatever they want without consequences. That you should get a free pass because it's just comedy." She made air quotes with her fingers, her face twisted in disgust. The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath that echoed through the studio. Some people put their hands over their mouths. This was getting personal, and fast. You could feel the energy in the room change, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. Atkinson sat up straighter, his spine going rigid, and his voice remained calm. But you could hear the steel in it now, sharp and unyielding. "I think comedians should be able to explore ideas, even uncomfortable ones, without being destroyed for it. That's not the same as saying there shouldn't be consequences for genuinely harmful speech. There's a distinction there that seems to be lost in these conversations. We've conflated discomfort with harm, disagreement with violence, and in doing so, we've made it impossible to have meaningful dialogue about anything controversial." Whoopi scoffed, actually. Scoffed on live television, throwing her head back and making a dismissive sound that the microphones picked up perfectly. "That's such bullshit, and you know it. You want to hide behind, 'Oh, it's just comedy,' while saying offensive things. I've heard this excuse 1,000,000 times from 1,000,000 different comedians who got caught saying something they shouldn't have said." The other hosts looked absolutely mortified, their faces pale, their eyes wide with shock. Nobody expected Whoopi to come at a guest this hard, especially someone as respected and beloved as Rowan Atkinson. The man had built a career on making people laugh without ever really courting controversy. But Whoopi wasn't done, not even close. "You know what I think?" Whoopi continued, her voice rising, her finger now pointing at him accusingly. "I think you're mad because you can't make the same jokes you used to make. The world has moved on, society has progressed, and you're stuck in the past, complaining about it like some old man yelling at clouds. You had your time, and now you're bitter that it's over." That's when something shifted in Atkinson's demeanor. You could see it happen in real time, like watching a dam start to crack. The polite British gentleman facade that he'd maintained for the entire interview started to crumble. His face flushed red, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. "You don't know the first thing about what I think," he said, his voice low and dangerous, each word carefully pronounced. "You've invited me here, not to have a conversation, but to attack me based on assumptions you've made, without bothering to actually understand my position or my work." Whoopi laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was mocking, cruel even, the kind of laugh that's designed to make someone feel small. "Oh, please don't play the victim card. You came on this show knowing exactly what we talk about here. You knew what you were getting into. Did you really think you could come here, spout your views about comedy and free speech, and we'd all just nod along and agree with you? This isn't some softball interview on British television where everyone's too polite to challenge you." The audience made a collective sound, somewhere between a gasp and a murmur. Some people were nodding along with Whoopi, but others looked uncomfortable, like they were watching something they shouldn't be seeing. Atkinson leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. What I knew was that I was invited to discuss my work, my career, my perspective on comedy and its role in society. What I didn't know was that I'd be ambushed by someone who's already made up their mind about who I am without bothering to actually listen to what I'm saying. You're not having a conversation with me, Whoopi. You're having a conversation with some imaginary version of me that you've constructed in your head. The studio went dead silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the sound of someone shifting in their seat. You could hear the hum of the studio lights overhead. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this unbelievable moment that would be replayed millions of times online within hours. Whoopi's face flushed red, her jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscles working. Ambushed? Are you serious right now? I'm asking you legitimate questions about your public statements. You've gone on record multiple times talking about cancel culture, about sensitivity, about how hard it is to be a comedian these days. Don't act like I'm making this up out of thin air. No, Atkinson shot back, his voice finally rising to match hers, his British accent getting sharper with each word. You're twisting my words to fit a narrative you've already decided on. You're taking nuanced positions and flattening them into caricatures. There's a difference between asking questions and conducting an interrogation designed to make your guest look bad, and you know it. One of the other hosts, her voice shaking slightly, tried again to intervene. Maybe we should take a breath here and... She reached out tentatively, as if trying to physically calm the situation. No! Whoopi interrupted, her voice reaching a volume nobody had heard from her before. She slammed her hand on the table with such force that her coffee mug jumped, spilling liquid onto the surface. The sound echoed through the studio like a gunshot. I'm tired of people like him coming on here, talking about freedom of speech, when what they really mean is freedom from criticism, freedom from consequences, freedom from having to think about how their words affect other people. You want to say whatever you want, hide behind "it's just a joke." But the second someone pushes back, the second someone holds you accountable, you cry about being attacked, about being censored, about being silenced. Well, guess what? You're not silenced. You're right here on national television, being given a platform to share your views. Atkinson stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor with a harsh, grinding sound that made everyone wince. The audience gasped again, louder this time, some people actually standing up themselves as if they might need to intervene. This was unprecedented. In all the years The View had been on the air, guests don't just stand up in the middle of a heated debate. They might raise their voices, they might disagree strongly, but they don't stand up. That's crossing a line. This is exactly the problem, Atkinson said, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger, his hands trembling at his sides. You're not listening. You're not engaging with what I'm actually saying. You're fighting against a straw man version of me that you've constructed in your head. I never said I should be free from criticism. I welcome criticism. What I don't welcome is misrepresentation, character assassination, and the complete unwillingness to engage with my actual positions rather than some cartoon villain version of them that's easier for you to attack. Whoopi stood up too, matching his energy, refusing to be towered over even though they were now the same height. Her eyes were blazing with fury. Maybe that straw man is just who you really are. Maybe you can't handle being called out. Maybe the problem isn't that I'm not listening. Maybe the problem is that I'm listening too well and I'm hearing exactly what you're saying underneath all the fancy philosophical language and the appeals to nuance. I've been in this business for decades. I've seen every type of performer there is, and I know when someone's trying to dress up their privilege in intellectual clothing. Called out for what? Atkinson shouted, and the audience actually jumped in their seats, some people flinching at the volume. Rowan Atkinson, the man known for his quiet, physical comedy. The man known for Mr. Bean's near silence. The man known for his measured, thoughtful public persona, was shouting on live television in front of millions of viewers. His face was completely red now, a vein visible in his forehead. For suggesting that comedy requires some degree of freedom to explore ideas. For saying that intent matters when we judge someone's words. For believing that not every mistake or misstep deserves to end someone's career and destroy their livelihood. Is that what I'm being called out for? There it is. Whoopi pointed at him triumphantly, her fingers shaking with emotion. You think people shouldn't face consequences for their actions? That's exactly what I'm talking about. You want to live in a world where you can say whatever you want, do whatever you want, and nobody gets to hold you accountable because, oh, I didn't mean it that way, or you're taking it out of context, or it was just a joke. Well, that's not how the real world works anymore. That's not what I said. Atkinson's face was now completely flushed, his British accent getting thicker and more pronounced with each word, the way it does when he's emotional. You're doing it again. Right now, in this very moment, you're putting words in my mouth that I never said. I never said people shouldn't face consequences. What I said, what I have always said, is that the consequences should be proportionate to the offense. That there should be room for context, for intent, for apology and redemption. That we shouldn't destroy someone's entire life, their career, their reputation, everything they've built, over a single moment without considering the full picture. The producers were frantically signaling from off-camera, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. The other hosts sat frozen, not knowing whether to try to calm things down or just let it play out. Whoopi crossed her arms. Then what are you saying, Rowan? Use your words. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old, since apparently I'm too stupid to understand your genius. Perspective. The sarcasm was dripping from every word. Atkinson took a deep breath, clearly trying to compose himself, but you could see his hands shaking. I'm saying, he began, his voice tight with controlled fury, that comedy is supposed to challenge us. It's supposed to make us think about things from different angles. Sometimes that means being provocative. Sometimes that means making people uncomfortable. But there's a difference between comedy that punches down to hurt people and comedy that challenges societal norms to make us question our assumptions. Whoopi rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh, here we go with a provocative comedy defense. Same excuse every comedian uses when they get backlash for saying something shitty. And there's that word again, Atkinson said, his voice rising once more. Backlash, criticism, as if those are the same as having your livelihood destroyed, being blacklisted, or having people try to erase decades of work over a single mistake or misunderstood joke. Maybe if the joke was that bad, they deserve it. Whoopi shot back. Who decides? Atkinson demanded. Who gets to be the arbiter of what's acceptable? You? The mob on social media? Where's the line, Whoopi? Where exactly is the line between holding someone accountable and destroying them? Whoopi stepped closer to him, her voice venomous. The line is wherever decent people say it is. And if you can't figure that out, maybe you shouldn't be making jokes. The audience was completely silent, watching this unfold like a car crash they couldn't look away from. The other hosts had given up trying to intervene. This was Whoopi and Rowan's fight now. Atkinson laughed bitterly. Decent people, right. And I suppose you're the spokesperson for all decent people? You get to decide who's in and who's out. That's not moral authority. That's moral tyranny. How dare you? Whoopi's voice went quiet, which somehow made it even more threatening. How dare you come on my show and call me a tyrant? I didn't call you a tyrant, Atkinson said, his voice matching her intensity. I said the mindset is tyrannical. There's a difference. But since you seem intent on misunderstanding everything I say, I'm not surprised you missed that distinction too. Get out, Whoopi said suddenly, pointing toward the exit. Get the hell out of my studio. The audience gasped collectively. One of the hosts actually said, "Oh my God," out loud, which the microphones picked up. Atkinson stared at her, his chest heaving with emotion. Gladly. This has been one of the most intellectually dishonest conversations I've ever had, and that's saying something. Intellectually dishonest? Whoopi's voice went up an octave. You're the one hiding behind fancy words and philosophical bullshit to defend your outdated views. My outdated views? Atkinson gestured wildly, his composure completely gone now. The idea that people should be able to speak freely, that intent matters, that context is important, these are outdated views. These are the foundations of a free society. Free society doesn't mean freedom from consequences, Whoopi yelled back. I never said it did, Atkinson roared, and the audience actually recoiled at the volume. How many times do I have to say that before it penetrates? I'm talking about proportionality. I'm talking about giving people the benefit of the doubt. I'm talking about not destroying someone's entire life over a single moment. Some moments deserve to be career-ending, Whoopi shouted. And some don't. That's my entire point. There's no room for nuance anymore, no room for forgiveness, no room for growth or learning from mistakes. It's just straight to the execution, and people like you are holding the axe. One of the other hosts stood up, trying to physically get between them. Okay, we need to stop this right now. No! Both Whoopi and Atkinson shouted at the same time. Which would have been funny if the situation wasn't so intense. Atkinson ripped off his microphone, the wire snapping as he yanked it. You know what the saddest part of this is? I actually admired you. I respected your work, your talent, your journey. But this right here, this is everything that's wrong with discourse today. No listening, no understanding, just immediate judgment and condemnation. Whoopi's eyes were blazing. Don't you dare try to make me feel bad for calling out your bullshit. I've been in this industry longer than you've been doing comedy, and I know when someone's trying to dress up their privilege in pretty words about freedom. Privilege! Atkinson laughed harshly. There it is, the magic word that ends all discussion. Just call someone privileged and suddenly nothing they say matters, nothing they've experienced counts. Their perspective is automatically invalid. That's not what Whoopi started, but Atkinson cut her off. No, you don't get to clarify now. You've spent this entire interview twisting my words, so I'll return the favor. You've made it clear that you have no interest in an actual conversation. You just wanted to publicly shame someone you've decided represents everything you hate. The other hosts were frantically looking at the producers, who were making throat-cutting gestures to go to commercial, but nobody seemed to know how to actually make that happen with both stars standing and shouting. Whoopi's voice turned ice cold. Get off my stage, now. Atkinson was already gathering his things, already leaving. But let me tell you something before I go. You think you're fighting the good fight, standing up for people, but what you're really doing is creating an environment where nobody can have honest conversations anymore. Everyone's too afraid of saying the wrong thing, being misunderstood, or having their words twisted just like you've done to mine today. Oh, I'm so sorry you feel unsafe, Whoopi said with exaggerated sympathy that was clearly mocking. Maybe now you know how marginalized people feel every damn day. Atkinson stopped, turning back to face her one last time. You don't know anything about what I've experienced, what I've stood up for, or what I believe. You've decided who I am based on a few interviews and some out-of-context quotes. That's lazy, that's unfair, and frankly, it's beneath someone of your intelligence. Don't you dare talk down to me, Whoopi snarled. I'm not talking down to you. I'm talking directly to you, which is more than you've done for me this entire time. Atkinson's voice cracked with emotion. You've talked at me, around me, and past me, but never to me. Never actually engaged with what I'm saying. The tension in the studio was suffocating. The audience didn't know whether to clap, boo, or just sit in stunned silence. Most chose silence. Whoopi took a step toward him. You want engagement? Fine. I think you're a relic of a bygone era who can't accept that the world has changed. I think you're mad because you can't make the same jokes you used to make without people calling you out. And I think you're using this whole freedom of expression thing as a shield to avoid accountability. Atkinson's face went completely calm, which was somehow more frightening than when he was shouting. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the studio, everyone heard him clearly. And I think you've become exactly what you used to fight against. A bully with power who uses that power to silence people you disagree with. You don't want dialogue, you want submission. Well, you won't get it from me. Whoopi's mouth fell open, genuine shock crossing her face for the first time. Before she could respond, Atkinson turned and walked toward the exit. The cameras followed him as he strode through the studio, his back straight, his head high, completely ignoring the calls from the producers to wait. Rowan, one of the other hosts called out, but he didn't turn around. Whoopi stood there, her chest heaving, watching him leave. Good riddance, she shouted after him, but her voice sounded shaky now, uncertain. Atkinson reached the studio door, pushed it open with more force than necessary, and walked out without looking back. The door swung shut behind him with a loud bang that echoed through the silent studio. The camera cut back to the panel, where Whoopi stood alone, the other hosts still seated, all of them looking shell-shocked. The audience sat in absolute stunned silence, nobody moving, nobody speaking. After what felt like an eternity, one of the producers finally managed to call for a commercial break. The lights on the cameras went dark, but the damage was already done. The most explosive confrontation in talk show history had just been captured on live television, and there was no taking it back. Whoopi slowly sank back into her chair, her face unreadable as the studio erupted into chaos around her. Staff. Members rushed around frantically. Audience members whispered urgently to each other. And somewhere in the distance, you could hear a door slam as Rowan Atkinson left the building.